In this video, we uncover the shocking stories of Mexico's most evil women killers, women who hid behind ordinary lives while committing unthinkable crimes. From twisted love affairs to cold-blooded greed, their actions left families shattered and a nation stunned. Stay with us as we explore their chilling motives, the investigations that exposed them, and the dark legacies they left behind. These are true crimes you won't believe actually happened. 1. Juana Barraza. Juana Barraza was once known to Mexican wrestling fans as La Dama del Silencio, the Silent Lady. In the ring, she wore a mask and performed scripted battles, adored by crowds for her fierce energy. But behind that persona was a woman shaped by unimaginable hardship. Born in 1958 in rural Hidalgo, Mexico, Juana grew up in poverty. Her mother was an alcoholic who, according to Juana, traded her to an older man for 3 beers. This man abused her for years, leaving her pregnant at just 13. That betrayal, especially by her mother, would later fuel a rage she could never fully silence. By adulthood, Juana had 4 children of her own. She struggled to survive, working odd jobs and wrestling in small venues. Neighbors described her as quiet and polite. Though she carried a heavy grief, her eldest son died following a violent mugging. That personal tragedy, combined with her unresolved childhood trauma, deepened her resentment toward older women. To her, they were reflections of the mother who abandoned her. Between 2002 and 2006, Mexico City was gripped by fear. Elderly women, most living alone, were found strangled in their homes. The press dubbed the unknown killer La Mataviejitas, the old lady killer. The victims were women in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. Police noted a disturbing pattern. Entry into the victims' homes was gained through trust. The killer posed as a nurse, social worker, or someone offering help with government benefits. Once inside, she would strangle the victims using everyday items, phone cords, scarves, even a stethoscope before stealing valuables. The investigation was chaotic. For months, authorities believed the murderer was a man disguised as a woman. They even targeted transvestite communities in sweeps that led nowhere. Witness descriptions often conflicted, and public panic mounted with each killing. Everything changed on January 25th. Tarfather, 2006, after the murder of 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, police responding to a witness report caught a suspect fleeing the scene. It wasn't a man at all. It was Juana Barraza, broad-shouldered, short-haired, and carrying a stethoscope along with fake social service papers. Fingerprints tied her to multiple crime scenes. Confronted with the evidence, Juana confessed to a handful of murders, but denied the larger tally of over 40 deaths attributed to her. In 2008, she stood trial and was convicted on 16 counts of murder and aggravated burglary. The sentence, an astonishing 759 years in prison, though under Mexican law, she will serve a maximum of 60. Throughout the trial, prosecutors pointed to her lingering hatred of her mother as the motive behind the killings. Criminologists described her as deeply resentful, channeling childhood pain into acts of vengeance. When asked about her crimes, Juana offered little explanation. Instead, she said softly, "May God forgive you and not forget me." It was a chilling statement, one that leaves us questioning whether forgiveness was something she ever sought at all. 2. Sara Aldrete. Sara Maria Aldrete was once seen as a promising student with a bright future. Born in 1964 in Matamoros, Mexico, she grew up in a working-class family and attended school just across the border in Brownsville, Texas. Standing at 6'1", she was striking in appearance and admired for her academic achievements. By the late 1980s, She was studying physical education, working 2 part-time jobs, and preparing to transfer to a university. To those who knew her, Sara was disciplined, ambitious, and by all accounts, ordinary. But behind this promising exterior, she would become known as La Madrina, the godmother of one of Mexico's most notorious cult killings. The turning point came when Sara met Adolfo Constanzo, a charismatic Cuban-American fortune teller and cult leader. Constanzo blended elements of Afro-Caribbean religions like Palo Mayombe with Aztec-inspired rituals, promising his followers supernatural protection in their drug smuggling operations. He recognized Sara's intelligence and presence, and soon drew her into his world. To the outside world, she was still a college honor student. Within the cult, she became second in command, overseeing followers and participating in increasingly extreme rituals. Between 1987 and 1989, this cult operated out of a ranch near Matamoros. They kidnapped rivals, associates, and strangers alike, believing human sacrifices would shield their drug shipments and grant them power. Victims, mostly men connected to drug trafficking, were murdered through shootings, stabbings, and ritualistic acts. Their remains used in ceremonial cauldrons called ngangas. The killings escalated in frequency and brutality, culminating in March 1989 with the abduction of Mark Kilroy, a 21-year-old American student on spring break. His disappearance drew unprecedented attention from both U.S. and Mexican authorities, leading investigators to the cult's ranch. There, they uncovered shallow graves, ritual altars, and evidence of multiple murders. As the investigation closed in, Constanzo, Sara, and several cult members fled to Mexico City. Weeks later, police traced them to an apartment building. In a violent standoff, Constanzo ordered one of his followers to kill him rather than be captured. Sara was arrested alive. Initially, she portrayed herself as another victim of Constanzo's manipulation, claiming ignorance of the murders. But investigators, citing witness testimony and her intimate role in the cult, charged her with multiple counts of murder and criminal association. In 1990, Sara was sentenced to 6 years for criminal association. 4 years later, after further trials, she received a 62-year sentence for multiple murders linked to the Matamoros cult. She remains imprisoned in Mexico. Her case continues to evoke debate. Was she a victim of Constanzo's influence or an active architect of the violence? Sara Aldrete has rarely expressed remorse. Instead, she has issued cryptic warnings from prison. This religion will not end with us. It will continue. It is a haunting statement, suggesting that the darkness at Matamoros was never fully buried. 3. Christina Sanchez Esquivel. Christina Soledad Sanchez Esquivel was 31 years old when she was arrested in June 2010, a single mother of 6. She had been working as a domestic laborer in Nuevo León, Mexico. Born in 1979, Christina grew up in a poor household and endured repeated sexual abuse during her childhood. By 16, she had given birth to her first daughter. Over the next decade, she raised 3 more girls and 2 boys. Neighbors later described her as a loving and attentive mother, a woman who, despite her hardships, seemed devoted to her children. Beneath that public image, however, years of trauma had left deep scars. A psychiatric evaluation would later reveal antisocial tendencies, a striking lack of empathy, and what experts termed a marked tendency toward sadism. Investigators concluded that her crimes were driven by unresolved rage toward men, a lingering response to the abuse, humiliation, and neglect she endured throughout her life. This was not spontaneous violence, but an escalating cycle of resentment that finally turned deadly. In early 2010, a disturbing pattern emerged in the municipality of Garcia. Several taxi drivers went missing, only to be discovered murdered. The victims, all male and unconnected to each other beyond their occupation, were lured into remote areas and killed by stabbing or strangulation. Their vehicles were abandoned, and their remains discarded in an isolated well ominously nicknamed the Mouth of Hell. It was during this series of killings that the media began calling her La Matataxistas, or the taxi driver killer. Christina was not acting alone. Her partner in the crimes was Aaron Herrera Hernandez, a 27-year-old man who reportedly assisted her in both the luring and disposal of victims. Together, they targeted men they perceived as expendable, ordinary workers whose disappearances might initially go unnoticed. The investigation reached its breaking point after authorities linked Christina and Herrera to at least 5 murders, possibly a 6th, when police finally apprehended her on June 4th, 2010. They were struck by her composure. She showed no visible remorse during questioning, speaking matter-of-factly about events that had horrified the community. Evidence, combined with witness testimony, secured her conviction. In court, Christina was sentenced to 130 years in prison for multiple counts of murder. Herrera also received a lengthy sentence. The public reaction was one of shock. Female serial killers are rare in Mexico, and the case challenged long-held assumptions about gender and violence. Families of the victims expressed relief at the verdict, but mourned the profound loss caused by the killings. Psychologists later concluded that Christina's actions were not driven by greed or thrill-seeking, but by vengeance, a distorted attempt to reclaim power over a life defined by suffering. When asked to explain herself, she offered only a chilling remark. "I did what I did for them to feel something." It is a statement that leaves more questions than answers, a quiet echo of pain that continues to haunt this case. 4. Silvia Meraz Moreno. Silvia Meraz Moreno was 44 years old when she was arrested in 2012, accused of leading one of Mexico's most disturbing cult-related murder cases. Born in 1968 in the mining town of Nacozari, Sonora, Silvia grew up in poverty. She married young and raised several children in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Neighbors described the family as quiet but struggling, often relying on informal work to survive. Despite the hardship, Silvia managed to create a sense of unity within her household, but beneath this outward normalcy, she fostered a growing obsession with Santa Muerte, the folk saint personifying death. For Silvia, Santa Muerte was more than a symbol. She believed the skeletal figure could grant protection, wealth, and power. Her devotion escalated over the years, blending elements of Catholic prayer with ritualistic offerings. According to later psychological assessments, Silvia displayed symptoms of delusional thinking and an unwavering belief that blood sacrifices would earn divine favor. This belief would become the driving force behind her crimes. Between 2009 and 2012, Silvia orchestrated 3 murders, each committed with the help of her relatives. The first victim was Cleotilde Romero Pacheco, a 55-year-old woman and close friend of Silvia's. In December 2009, Cleotilde vanished. Investigators would later uncover that she had been killed during a ritual. The following year, the cult targeted a 10-year-old boy named Martin Rios Chaparro, the son of an acquaintance within the group. Their final victim, and perhaps the most shocking, was Silvia's own grandson, 10-year-old Jesus Octavio Martinez Yanez, killed in early 2012. In each case, the victims were chosen for ritual sacrifice. Their blood was offered to Santa Muerte in ceremonies performed at night. Candles illuminating makeshift altars adorned with skeletal statues and personal offerings. The family buried the bodies near their property. Convinced that their devotion would be rewarded, The investigation began almost by chance. In March 2012, local authorities were searching for Jesus Octavio after he was reported missing. A search of the family's home uncovered shallow graves and evidence of ritualistic activity. As police dug deeper, they uncovered the remains of all three victims. 8 members of Silvia's family were arrested, including her children, her partner, and even a minor. Confronted with the evidence, some confessed, detailing the ceremonies and Silvia's leadership role. In court, prosecutors described Silvia as the orchestrator. Driven by fanaticism and a promise of blessings from Santa Muerte, she was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The case shocked Mexico, highlighting the darker side of folk religious practices and sparking nationwide debate about the influence of Santa Muerte among marginalized communities. When asked about her actions, Silvia offered no remorse. Instead, she justified the killings as acts of faith, reportedly saying, "We all agreed to do it." Her words raise a haunting question when belief crosses into delusion. Where does faith end and fanaticism begin? 5. Magdalena Solis. Magdalena Solis was just 25 years old when she was arrested in 1963. But by then, she had already become known across Mexico as the High Priestess of Blood. Born into poverty in rural Mexico, Magdalena's childhood was marked by hardship and instability. Alongside her brother, Eleazar, she began working as a prostitute at a young age, a survival choice that would later entangle her in one of the country's most notorious cult murders. To outsiders, she appeared quiet and unremarkable, but in the secluded village of Yerba Buena, she would come to be worshipped as a living goddess. The path to violence began when 2 petty criminals, Santos and Cayetano Hernandez, devised a scheme to exploit the isolated and illiterate villagers of Yerba Buena. Claiming they were prophets of ancient Incan gods, they promised wealth and divine favor in exchange for loyalty and offerings. The community, desperate for hope, followed them into elaborate rituals in the surrounding caves. But when promised riches failed to appear, dissent began to rise. To maintain control, the Hernandez brothers introduced Magdalena and Eleazar into their con, presenting her, through smoke and theatrics, as a reincarnated goddess who demanded absolute devotion. What began as deception soon spiraled into delusion. Magdalena herself began to believe the role she was playing. Consumed by religious mania and feelings of grandeur, she declared that the gods required blood sacrifices to grant the villagers immortality and protection. This marked a terrifying escalation in the cult's activities. Between February and May of 1963, at least 8 villagers were killed during these so-called rituals. Those who questioned the cult's promises or tried to leave were labeled unbelievers and condemned to death. Victims were beaten and their blood collected for ceremonial consumption, acts the cult believed would sustain their goddess. Magdalena presided over each ritual. Her influence, absolute followers obeyed out of fear and fervent belief. The end came when a 14-year-old boy named Sebastian Guerrero stumbled upon one of these ceremonies and fled to the nearest police station. His frantic account was initially dismissed as hysteria, but when he and the officer who escorted him back to the scene disappeared, authorities were forced to investigate. A coordinated raid by police and military uncovered the mutilated remains of Guerrero, the officer, and several other victims hidden near the caves. Magdalena, Eleazar, and surviving cult members were arrested after a violent confrontation. In June 1963, Magdalena and her brother were convicted of 2 murders and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Though investigators suspected her involvement in many more deaths, psychological assessments later described her as delusional, sadistic, and consumed by power. Reflecting on her case, one question lingers. How did a woman once exploited by others come to command such devotion and orchestrate such horrors in the name of divinity? 6. Felicitas Sanchez Aguillon. Felicitas Sanchez Aguillon, also known as Felicitas Sanchez Neira, was born in 1890 in the coastal town of Cerro Azul, Veracruz, Mexico. From an early age, she displayed troubling behaviors, reportedly showing cruelty toward animals and demonstrating an aversion to anything associated with motherhood. Her strained relationship with her own mother shaped a profound lack of empathy that would echo throughout her life. As a young woman, she trained as a nurse and midwife, a profession that earned her trust and access to some of society's most vulnerable members. In her early adulthood, Felicitas married Carlos Conde and gave birth to twin daughters. But motherhood brought her no joy. She insisted the children be placed for adoption, a decision that ultimately ended her marriage. After their divorce, she relocated to Mexico City and began working in Colonia Roma, a neighborhood that would later become synonymous with her crimes. By the 1930s, she had built a grim enterprise, attending births, performing illegal abortions, and brokering black market adoptions. The environment of poverty and secrecy surrounding her work allowed her actions to go unnoticed for years. But according to later investigations, Felicitas's motives went beyond financial gain. Psychological assessments suggested deep-seated resentment toward motherhood itself. Those unable to be sold or adopted infants born from failed abortions or unwanted pregnancies became victims of her contempt. Witnesses later described her as emotionally detached, methodical, and disturbingly calm in the presence of suffering. Between 1930 and 1941, Felicitas Sanchez is believed to have killed as many as 40 to 50 infants. Her methods were clinical: poisoning, suffocation, and, in some cases, dismemberment. She disposed of remains by burning them or discarding them in nearby sewers, a practice that shielded her from suspicion for years. Many victims were the children of poor women seeking her services, women who had no means to question her or challenge her authority. Her downfall began in April 1941, when human remains were discovered near her apartment on Salamanca Street in Colonia Roma. The gruesome find triggered an investigation, which soon led police to her door. Inside, authorities uncovered evidence linking her to multiple infant deaths. Felicitas was arrested alongside her second husband, Roberto Covarrubias, and an associate who had assisted in disposing of bodies. The arrest sent shockwaves through Mexico City. As the scale of her crimes slowly emerged in the press, Felicitas never faced trial. While awaiting legal proceedings, she took her own life in prison on July 16, 1941, by overdosing on medication. Her case remains one of the darkest chapters in Mexican criminal history, earning her the grim moniker, the Ogress of Colonia Roma. Even today, her story raises a haunting question. How does someone entrusted to bring life into the world transform into a figure of such calculated destruction? 7. Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano. Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano lived in Mexico City at the close of the 19th century, during a time when the country was undergoing profound political and social change. Believed to belong to an upper or middle-class household, little is known of her early life beyond her marriage to a man named Bejarano and the birth of at least one child, Aurelio. Outwardly, she appeared respectable, a woman with social standing and the means to employ domestic help. But beneath this facade lay one of Mexico's first documented female serial killers, a figure later remembered as La Mujer Verdugo, or the fearsome Bejarano. Her crimes began in 1877 and would span over a decade. Guadalupe targeted young women and girls from poor backgrounds, often luring them to her home under the pretense of offering work as domestic servants. Once isolated, these victims found themselves trapped. Historical accounts suggest that Guadalupe derived personal gratification from the suffering she inflicted, a disturbing revelation for the era's justice system, which had rarely encountered women who killed for pleasure rather than necessity. The first known victim, Casimira Juarez, was murdered in 1887. Guadalupe was arrested and convicted, but, due to the lenient criminal codes of the time, served only a few years in prison. This brief confinement did nothing to curb her violent tendencies. Within months of her release, she struck again, this time against sisters Guadalupe and Crescencia Pineda in 1892. The girls vanished after accepting employment at her home, and neighbors began whispering of screams and strange activity within the Bejarano residence. The investigation that followed exposed grim evidence of abuse and captivity. The victims had been subjected to prolonged suffering before their deaths, suggesting deliberate cruelty rather than impulsive violence. Perhaps most shocking was the testimony of Guadalupe's own son, Aurelio, initially complicit through silence. He ultimately identified his mother as the perpetrator, a betrayal that cemented the case against her. In court, Guadalupe attempted to shift blame onto her son, claiming he had committed the murders. The jury did not believe her. Public outrage over the Pineda sisters' deaths was immense. Newspapers dubbed her the fearsome Bejarano, and engravings by artists such as José Guadalupe Posada circulated widely, capturing the public's morbid fascination. Many demanded her execution, but the law of the time did not allow capital punishment for women. Instead, she received a sentence of 10 years and 8 months, while Aurelio was sentenced to 2 years for his failure to act. Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano spent her final years in Belén prison for women, isolated from other inmates who despised her for her crimes. She died there of natural causes, largely forgotten by history. Yet her story endures as a chilling reminder. Evil can hide behind the veneer of respectability, emerging in places least expected, even in the home of a woman society once trusted. 8. Itzel Nayeli Montano. Itzel Nayeli Garcia Montano was born in 1995 in Chimalhuacan, a densely populated municipality on the outskirts of Mexico City. Raised in a large family of modest means, she grew up in conditions of poverty and instability. As the second of 6 children, she often cared for her younger siblings while her parents worked. She left school by the 3rd grade, unable to progress beyond basic literacy and arithmetic. Those who knew her described her as quiet and withdrawn, yet the hardships of her early life poverty, limited education, and exposure to a harsh environment left lasting marks on her psyche. By her teenage years, Itzel's life had already spiraled into turmoil. At 14, she entered a relationship with an older man and soon became pregnant. The pregnancy was ectopic and nearly cost her life. A life-saving hysterectomy left her unable to bear children, a trauma that reportedly deepened her isolation. Following the breakup of that relationship, she turned to alcohol, tobacco, and inhalants. By 17, she had entered a second turbulent relationship marked by frequent arguments and physical confrontations. Her daily life revolved around selling sweets outside the Mexico City metro, a meager existence in a city teeming with hardship. In September 2015, Chimalhuacan was gripped by fear. A series of seemingly random stabbings shocked the community. The attacker's method was startlingly direct, approaching victims from behind and striking the neck, often in broad daylight. Within days, 2 people were dead and several more injured. Among the victims were men and women of varying ages, none of whom had any known connection to each other. Witnesses described a young woman with long dark hair and tattoos of Santa Muerte, a folk saint associated with death and protection, The randomness of the attacks fueled mass panic. Vigilante groups formed overnight, patrolling neighborhoods with improvised weapons. Rumors spread wildly. Some believed the attacker was a man disguised as a woman. Others feared a cult-inspired killer. The press gave her a chilling nickname, the Decapitator of Chimalhuacan. Police struggled to catch her until two men came forward, her own partner and a fellow street vendor claiming she had attacked them in separate incidents. Both survived and identified her to authorities. On October 2nd, 2015, Itzel was arrested near her home. Under interrogation, she admitted to 2 assaults, blaming alcohol and inhalant use, but denied the full scope of the killings attributed to her. Despite this, investigators linked her to 7 attacks, 2 of them fatal. In 2017, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted murder, with additional charges still pending. Her motives remain unclear, whether rooted in addiction, untreated trauma, or deeper psychological instability. As Chimalhuacan slowly returned to normal, one question lingered. Was this a case of random violence fueled by desperation, or the first glimpse into something far darker lying beneath the surface of an unassuming young woman? 9. Las Poquianchis, Maria Delfina González Valenzuela. Maria del Carmen González Valenzuela, Maria Luisa González Valenzuela, and Maria de Jesus González Valenzuela, 4 sisters from Jalisco. Mexico would come to be known collectively as Las Poquianchis. By the time of their arrest in 1964, authorities believed they were responsible for one of the most prolific series of murders in Mexico's history. Official counts confirmed 91 victims, but investigators suspected the number may have exceeded 200. The sisters were born into hardship. Their father, a policeman named Isidro Torres, ruled their household with severe discipline. He forbade them from wearing makeup, speaking to boys, or showing even minor signs of independence. When they disobeyed, he reportedly locked them in a cell at the police station. A violent incident in which he shot and killed a man forced the family to relocate to San Francisco del Rincon, Guanajuato. There, the sisters grew up in a cycle of poverty and fear, conditions that would later shape their criminal enterprise. Seeking escape from their circumstances, the sisters opened a bar, hoping to gain financial independence. When the bar failed, they turned to prostitution as a means of survival. What began as a small operation soon expanded into a network that spanned several states. By the early 1950s, the sisters ran Rancho El Angel, a secluded property that functioned as both brothel and prison for countless young women. Many of these women had been lured by fraudulent job ads promising domestic work, only to find themselves trapped in forced sex work. As their operation grew, so did its brutality. Victims were reportedly subjected to drugs, isolation, and relentless abuse. When the women became ill, aged, or resisted, they were killed. Male clients carrying large sums of cash also disappeared. The murders followed a chillingly pragmatic pattern, eliminating anyone who ceased to be profitable or posed a threat to the business. The sisters' casual attitude toward the deaths was epitomized by Delfina's infamous remark when questioned by authorities. The food didn't sit well with them. The case unraveled when police arrested Josefina Gutierrez, a woman suspected of recruiting girls for the sisters. Under interrogation, she revealed the horrors occurring at Rancho El Angel. A raid on the property uncovered a mass grave containing dozens of women, men, and even infants. The sheer scale of the crimes shocked Mexico and drew international attention. In 1964, the 4 sisters were tried and each sentenced to 40 years in prison. Their fates varied behind bars. Delfina died after an accident involving construction work in the prison. Carmen succumbed to cancer, Maria Luisa reportedly suffered a mental breakdown, and Maria de Jesus completed her sentence before vanishing from public view. Their legacy remains a chilling study in power, greed, and the darkness that can emerge when cruelty is shared and reinforced within a family. The unanswered question lingers. Was this monstrous enterprise born of poverty, control, or something far more disturbing at the heart of their bond as sisters? 10. Flor Cazarin Gonzalez. Flor Cazarin Gonzalez, known in Chihuahua as La Madrina, or the godmother, was arrested at age 42 in June 2018. Before her arrest, she was considered charismatic and adaptable. She worked various jobs under different aliases and appeared friendly and trustworthy to those around her. Neighbors described her as resourceful and even helpful, never suspecting the hidden life she was leading. Beneath this outward charm, investigators later revealed a darker personality defined by manipulation and emotional detachment. Psychological evaluations suggested she displayed antisocial traits, showing little empathy and a willingness to exploit others for personal gain. Some analysts believe a deep resentment toward people she viewed as vulnerable may have fueled her actions. Between 2016 and 2018, Flor operated with her adult son, Roberto, and several accomplices. Their crimes targeted middle-aged and elderly individuals, often those living alone or seeking companionship. Flor's approach was methodical. Using false identities, she befriended victims or entered brief romantic relationships to gain their trust. Once close, she drugged them with clonazepam, robbed their homes, and eliminated them by stabbing or strangulation. Two cases stand out as confirmed examples of her pattern. In July 2016, Flor, Roberto, and another man entered the home of 49-year-old Carlota Munoz Duran. Drugged and defenseless, Carlota was fatally stabbed, and her car and household goods were stolen. Just months later, in November, Flor and her group targeted Griselda Moyaro Delgado. She was kidnapped, driven to a remote location, and murdered in a similar manner. Both crimes shared the same hallmarks: calculated drugging, theft, and brutal precision. The investigation unfolded gradually. Witness testimony and surviving victims described a woman who gained trust through pseudonyms, only to betray it moments later. Rumors spread in Chihuahua City about a woman preying on the vulnerable, creating fear throughout the community. A critical breakthrough came when a protected witness provided detailed information about one of the killings, describing Flor's chilling calmness during the act. Flor and her son were finally arrested in June 2018. In 2020, she was convicted of 2 murders and aggravated robbery, receiving a 44-year sentence, while the court only confirmed 2 killings. Authorities believe she may have been responsible for as many as 20 to 25 deaths. Her accomplices were also prosecuted. Though their roles varied in severity, experts point to material gain as her primary motive: stealing vehicles, appliances, and valuables from those she deceived. Yet her behavior during the attacks suggested more than just financial ambition. Witnesses described her as disturbingly composed, even amused, in moments of violence. Public reaction was one of shock and betrayal, especially given that many victims were members of her own community. Flor's story leaves a lingering question. How could someone so skilled at earning trust turn it into a weapon, using connection itself as the pathway to destruction? 11. Sharon Elizabeth Kinne. Sharon Elizabeth Kinne was only 20 when she became the focus of one of the most notorious criminal cases in American history. Outwardly, she was the image of a suburban housewife in Independence, Missouri, married, a mother of 2, and active in her church. Yet beneath that seemingly ordinary life simmered discontent. Sharon was known for wanting more money, more freedom, and more excitement than her modest life could offer. Her marriage to James Kinne began as a teenage romance, but soon soured. By 1960, arguments over finances and Sharon's alleged infidelity had pushed the couple to the brink of divorce. Then, in March of that year, James was found dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Sharon insisted it was a tragic accident, that their 2-year-old daughter had accidentally pulled the trigger. Investigators initially accepted her story, and the case was closed. But just months later, another death reopened questions. Patricia Jones, the wife of one of Sharon's lovers, vanished and was soon discovered shot to death. Evidence pointed toward Sharon, who admitted to seeing Patricia shortly before she disappeared. Charged with Patricia's murder and later her husband's, Sharon would face 3 separate trials. Each ended inconclusively: one acquittal, one overturned conviction, and one hung jury. Amid the legal chaos, Sharon remained calm, even charming, earning the nickname La Pistolera for her composure and her association with firearms. She became infamous not only for the crimes themselves, but for her ability to evade final judgment. In 1964, before a 4th trial could begin, Sharon fled to Mexico with a companion. There, events took another shocking turn. She was arrested for killing Francisco Paredes Ordonez, claiming self-defense during an alleged assault. This time, there was no escape from conviction. She was sentenced to 10 years in a Mexican prison, later increased to 13. Yet even incarceration couldn't hold her. On December 7th, 1969, Sharon Kinne escaped from Ixtapalapa Women's Prison during a blackout. Despite extensive manhunts and international alerts, she was never found. Her arrest warrant, still active decades later, is one of the longest standing in U.S. history. Psychologists who studied her case have described Sharon as manipulative, calculating, and potentially sociopathic, capable of charm, but devoid of remorse. Her motives appeared to blend personal gain, jealousy, and a willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. Today, Sharon Kinne's fate remains a mystery. Did she flee into a quiet life under a new identity? Or did her past eventually catch up with her in silence? The question lingers, as does her chilling remark once reported by investigators. "I've shot men before and I got away with it." 12. Yesenia Patino González. Yesenia Patino's life was a complex web of transformation and turmoil long before the crime that would define her. Born in 1957, she grew up in Mexico and later transitioned from male to female in the 1980s. Friends described her as elegant, soft-spoken, and strikingly beautiful. Yet beneath this composed exterior lay a turbulent past of broken relationships, survival through sex work, and a deep longing for acceptance. That longing found focus when she met Daniel Willoughby, a married man from Arizona. Their relationship quickly escalated into obsession. By 1991, Yesenia and Daniel were engaged in an affair that, according to investigators, was built on secrecy and fantasy. Daniel's wife, Patricia Trish Willoughby, remained devoted to her marriage and her Mormon faith, unaware of the depth of the betrayal surrounding her. But Yesenia's jealousy was growing. She reportedly told friends she wanted Daniel to herself. Completely, the looming presence of Trish and the life insurance policies worth over $1 million would become a deadly combination. In February 1991, the Willoughby family traveled to Puerto Penasco, Mexico, for a beachside vacation. It was there that Trish's life came to a sudden, violent end. While the details remain clouded in contradictory testimony, prosecutors alleged a chilling sequence. Trish was attacked while resting inside a rented condo, first bludgeoned and then stabbed. Her jewelry was taken to make the crime appear as a robbery. The brutality shocked investigators. But the emotional core of the case was even more startling. This was not a random act of violence, but an intimate betrayal. Yesenia's involvement became undeniable when Trisha's wedding ring was discovered in her possession. Arrested in Mexico, she initially confessed to the murder, claiming she had acted alone out of love and jealousy. Yet, in other moments, she accused Daniel of being the mastermind, even the one who struck the fatal blows. Her testimony shifted repeatedly over the years, casting shadows of doubt that linger to this day. In Mexican court, Yesenia was convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Daniel Willoughby faced his own trials in the United States, at first receiving a death sentence later overturned, and eventually 2 life sentences for his role in the crime. The public followed every twist of the story drawn in by its sensational mix of love, betrayal, and greed. Psychologists who reviewed the case suggested Yesenia's motives stemmed from obsession and a desperate need for validation. Whether she acted alone or as part of a plot remains debated, but her calm recounting of the murder without visible remorse left many uneasy. As Yesenia herself once said, in a rare moment of reflection, "I just wanted him to be mine."